They say the water of Loch Ness does not reflect the sky the way other lakes do. It swallows light. It swallows sound. And sometimes, if the old stories are to be believed, it swallows the truth. On certain mornings in the Scottish Highlands, when the mist drifts low and the surface lies unnaturally still, the loch feels less like a body of water and more like a closed eye, waiting. Fishermen speak of sudden ripples in windless air. Hikers recall the sensation of being watched from beneath the black surface. Sonar operators have recorded shapes that do not behave like fish, nor like drifting debris. Long, deliberate movements, massive, alive. For nearly a century, photographs have surfaced. Blurred silhouettes, a curved neck breaking the waterline, a shadow longer than any known creature in these depths. Each time, experts dismiss them. Each time, new witnesses step forward. But here is what makes the legend unsettling. The reports are eerily consistent. The size, the motion, the silence before it appears. And beneath the peat-dark waters of Loch Ness, over 700 feet deep in places, there are vast stretches no camera has truly explored. Something could be down there, watching, waiting. The modern legend of the Loch Ness Monster did not begin in ancient times. It began with ink on paper. On May 2nd, 1933, the local newspaper, the Inverness Courier, published a short but electrifying report. A local couple, driving along the newly constructed road near the loch, claimed they had witnessed an enormous animal rolling and plunging on the surface. According to their account, the disturbance lasted several minutes before the creature disappeared beneath the dark water. It was not described as a myth, not as folklore. It was reported as an observation. The timing was crucial. A modern road had just been completed along the northern shore of Loch Ness, increasing traffic and visibility. For the first time, large numbers of people could observe the water from close range. And almost immediately, sightings began. Within weeks, additional witnesses came forward. Some described a long neck rising from the surface. Others spoke of humps moving steadily across the loch against the wind. Fishermen reported unexplained turbulence in calm conditions. What made these early reports remarkable was their consistency. Independent observers, unknown to one another, described similar shapes and movements. Then came July 1933. The Scotsman ran a story about a sighting witnessed from shore, a creature with a serpentine form gliding through the water. The tone of the article was cautious but serious. The event was not ridiculed, it was examined. But the story truly exploded later that year. In November 1933, a London surgeon named Robert Kenneth Wilson allegedly captured what would become the most famous image in cryptozoological history. The photograph, later published in the Daily Mail in 1934, showed a long, elegant neck rising from the water, with a small head poised above the surface. It was quickly dubbed the surgeon's photograph. Unlike previous blurry shapes, this image appeared composed, clear, anatomical. Newspapers across Britain and beyond reprinted it. The monster now had a face, or at least a silhouette. Scientists debated. Skeptics questioned scale. Supporters argued that no known animal matched the proportions shown in the image. The photograph gave the legend structure. It transformed vague sightings into something visual, something concrete. And yet, even before the photograph, reports had already been multiplying. By the end of 1933, the loch had become a site of intense curiosity. Amateur investigators camped along its shores. Armed with binoculars and early cameras, they waited for movement. Some left disappointed. Others claimed fleeting glimpses of something massive breaking the surface before vanishing without a trace. One detail repeated itself in report after report. Silence. Witnesses often described an unnatural stillness before a sighting. Birds would stop calling, the water would flatten. Then, movement. A slow emergence, a ripple traveling against the current. Skeptics insisted that heightened expectation fueled imagination. After all, once newspapers plant an idea, the mind searches for confirmation. But defenders of the phenomenon pointed out that many early witnesses had no prior belief in a monster. Some were reluctant to speak publicly at all. The debate had begun. Was Loch Ness revealing an undiscovered species, a surviving relic of prehistory? Or was the human mind, when faced with vast, dark water, simply incapable of accepting emptiness? What cannot be denied is this. In 1933, something changed. The reports became structured, recorded, archived. And once ink touched paper, the legend could no longer sink quietly back into the depths. By the early 1960s, the legend of Loch Ness had outgrown newspapers and speculation. If something truly inhabited the depths of the loch, then science would find it. In 1962, a group of researchers and enthusiasts formed the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau, LNIB. Unlike casual monster hunters, the Bureau aimed to apply systematic observation. Their method was simple but disciplined. Trained volunteers would monitor the loch from fixed observation posts around the shoreline, equipped with binoculars, cameras, and detailed logging procedures. For years, they kept watch. Hundreds of hours were recorded. Weather conditions were documented. Wave patterns were studied. Any unusual surface disturbance was photographed and catalogued. While many sightings could be attributed to boat wakes, floating debris, or natural wave interference, a small number of reports remained unexplained. But visual observation had limits. The loch is over 700 feet deep in places, its waters darkened by peat particles that drastically reduce visibility. If a large animal existed there, it might rarely surface. That realization shifted the approach from watching the surface to scanning the depths. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, sonar technology, originally developed for naval use, was deployed in systematic sweeps of Loch Ness. Boats equipped with echo-sounding devices moved slowly across the water, transmitting sound waves downward and recording the returning signals. Most returns showed predictable readings: sediment, schools of fish, submerged terrain. But occasionally, operators recorded something different. Large, moving echoes. Targets that appeared at significant depth, sometimes mid-water column, rather than near the bottom. Objects that did not behave like fish shoals. In some cases, the sonar indicated movement against expected currents. One particularly intriguing operation took place in 1972, organized by the Academy of Applied Science under the direction of Robert H. Rines. Using advanced sonar and underwater photographic equipment, the team claimed to have captured images of a large, flipper-like appendage deep below the surface. By the early 1960s, the legend of Loch Ness had outgrown newspapers and speculation. If something truly inhabited the depths of the loch, then science would find it. In 1962, a group of researchers and enthusiasts formed the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau, LNIB. Unlike casual monster hunters, the Bureau aimed to apply systematic observation. Their method was simple but disciplined. Trained volunteers would monitor the loch from fixed observation posts around the shoreline, equipped with binoculars, cameras, and detailed logging procedures. For years, they kept watch. Hundreds of hours were recorded. Weather conditions were documented. Wave patterns were studied. Any unusual surface disturbance was photographed and catalogued. While many sightings could be attributed to boat wakes, floating debris, or natural wave interference, a small number of reports remained unexplained. But visual observation had limits. The loch is over 700 feet deep in places, its waters darkened by peat particles that drastically reduce visibility. If a large animal existed there, it might rarely surface. That realization shifted the approach from watching the surface to scanning the depths. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, sonar technology, originally developed for naval use, was deployed in systematic sweeps of Loch Ness. Boats equipped with echo-sounding devices moved slowly across the water, transmitting sound waves downward and recording the returning signals. Most returns showed predictable readings: sediment, schools of fish, submerged terrain. But occasionally, operators recorded something different. Large, moving echoes, targets that appeared at significant depth, sometimes mid-water column, rather than near the bottom. Objects that did not behave like fish shoals. In some cases, the sonar indicated movement against expected currents. One particularly intriguing operation took place in 1972, organized by the Academy of Applied Science under the direction of Robert H. Rines. Using advanced sonar and underwater photographic equipment, the team claimed to have captured images of a large, flipper-like appendage deep below the surface.
By the mid-1980s, the mystery of Loch Ness had reached a critical point. Decades of sightings, photographs, and isolated sonar anomalies had created a paradox. There was too much data to dismiss entirely, but never enough to prove anything. So in 1987, researchers launched what would become one of the most ambitious searches in the Loch's history, Operation Deep Scan. Organized by members of the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau and independent sonar specialists, Deep Scan was designed to eliminate chance. Instead of isolated sonar sweeps, the team deployed a coordinated line of boats stretching across the width of the loch. Each vessel carried echo-sounding equipment. Moving slowly in formation, they created a continuous acoustic barrier, a sweeping wall of sound scanning the depths from shore to shore. If something large existed in the loch, it would have nowhere to hide. The operation lasted for days. Most of the returns were routine: underwater terrain, fish shoals, suspended sediment. But then operators recorded something unusual. Several strong echoes appeared at significant depth, far below typical fish activity. These returns suggested large moving objects, estimated by some analysts to be up to 20 feet in length. More intriguingly, in certain moments, multiple boats detected anomalous signals simultaneously. Mass echo contacts. The objects did not behave like drifting debris. They appeared to move deliberately, yet they did not surface. No visual confirmation followed. Skeptics argued the readings were likely large fish clusters, misinterpreted by early sonar resolution limits. Others suggested temperature layers in the water, thermoclines, could create misleading reflections. But supporters pointed out one critical detail. Some signals showed vertical movement, upward, then down again. After Deep Scan, the conversation changed. It was no longer about blurry photographs. It was about coordinated acoustic data, and technology continued to improve. In the 1990s and 2000s, more advanced scanning systems were introduced. Side-scan sonar provided clearer imaging of submerged objects. Eventually, multi-beam sonar, capable of producing detailed 3D maps of underwater terrain, was used to chart the loch's floor with unprecedented precision. These surveys revealed steep drop-offs, underwater ridges, and deep, sediment-filled basins. They eliminated myths of hidden tunnels connecting the loch to the sea. They mapped geological features in remarkable detail, but mapping the bottom did not answer the central question, because whatever the sonar had occasionally detected was not fixed to the terrain. It moved. Modern multibeam systems dramatically reduced ambiguity. Schools of fish could be identified. Debris could be classified. Yet even with improved resolution, rare anomalous contacts continued to surface in data logs. Brief, isolated, inconclusive. Nothing definitive. Nothing that could be held up as proof. Yet nothing that completely erased the possibility either. The deeper scientists looked, the clearer the landscape became. But the moving echoes remained elusive. For believers, deep scan and the generations of sonar that followed proved that Loch Ness was not empty. For skeptics, the same data demonstrated how easily complex acoustic environments could generate false positives. And so the paradox endured. Each technological leap promised closure. Each scan sharpened the image. Each expedition narrowed the unknown, but never eliminated it. The loch remained dark, the depths remained vast, and somewhere within those black waters, unexplained echoes continued to flicker across screens, there for a moment, gone the next. Technology improved, the mystery remained. By the late 20th century, the Loch Ness mystery had split into two camps, biology and belief. But there was a third possibility: silence. Loch Ness is not just deep, it is long, narrow, and shielded by steep highland terrain. Its cold, dark waters and limited visibility make it an ideal, natural testing environment for underwater equipment. During the Cold War era, the United Kingdom invested heavily in sonar research, submarine detection systems, and acoustic tracking technologies. And while there is no public confirmation of classified monster hunts, there are records of military sonar training exercises conducted in Scottish waters. Which raises a question: was Loch Ness ever used, quietly, as a testing ground? Some researchers have pointed out that certain high-resolution sonar datasets gathered during advanced naval exercises have never been released in full, not redacted, not summarized, simply absent from public archives. Officially, this is not unusual. Military sonar data often contains sensitive acoustic signatures, the kind that reveal how detection systems perform in real conditions. Publishing that information could compromise national security. But for those who follow the Loch Ness case, the absence feels familiar. Because over the decades, there have been instances where reported sightings briefly entered local records, only to become difficult to trace later. Newspaper references exist, witnesses exist, but original documentation sometimes does not. Lost files, missing negatives, unavailable raw sonar logs. Coincidence? Skeptics argue, yes. Archival degradation is common. Small local newspapers shut down. Records are misplaced. Believers argue something else. They suggest that if unusual underwater objects were detected during naval testing, there would be two possible explanations: unknown biological life or classified machinery, unmanned submersibles, prototype drones, experimental acoustic decoys. If such equipment were ever mistaken for a creature, authorities would have little incentive to clarify. A monster is less dangerous than a revealed defense project. And then there is the acoustic anomaly problem. Loch Ness has unique underwater acoustics. Its steep sides and deep basin create unusual echo behavior. In military research, environments like this are valuable for testing how sonar systems respond to complex reflections, which leads to an unsettling possibility. What if some of the most dramatic sonar returns were never biological at all? What if they were human-made, but unacknowledged? This does not require conspiracy. It requires classification. During periods of geopolitical tension, secrecy is standard protocol. Data is compartmentalized. Public curiosity is irrelevant. And if an unidentified sonar contact appeared during an exercise, it would be logged, studied, filed, not broadcast. Of course, there is no concrete evidence that the monster is military hardware. But the pattern of partial transparency fuels speculation. Why are some datasets summarized rather than released? Why do certain advanced scans result only in general statements? Why do official responses tend to emphasize natural explanations without providing raw acoustic logs? Perhaps because there was nothing extraordinary to reveal. Or perhaps because the extraordinary was not meant for public discussion. There is one final, quieter question. If Loch Ness were used, even occasionally, for classified testing, and if unusual readings were recorded, who would control the narrative? Scientists, journalists, or institutions bound by secrecy? For nearly a century, the mystery of Loch Ness has thrived in the gap between data and disclosure, between detection and explanation, between what is seen and what is released. And in that gap, the legend survives. Not necessarily because something ancient swims in the depths, but because sometimes what lies beneath the surface is not biology. It is information. For nearly a century, the explanations have multiplied. Mass hysteria, misidentified wildlife, floating debris, military experiments, giant eels, optical illusion. Each theory steps forward with confidence, and each leaves something unresolved. Because beneath all the noise, the headlines, the hoaxes, the sonar charts, there is one detail that refuses to disappear. The pattern. From 1933 to the present day, independent witnesses have described remarkably similar encounters. A long, dark shape breaking the surface. A neck, sometimes described as slender, sometimes thick, arising vertically from the water. A small head, no splashing, no violent disturbance, just motion. Controlled, deliberate, then disappearance. What makes this unsettling is not that people claim to see something strange, it is that they describe it the same way. Decade after decade, witnesses separated by geography, age, background, and belief. Farmers in the 1930s, tourists in the 1960s, drone operators in the 2000s, drivers pulling over on the A82 today. Different eras, different technologies, same description. If it is mass suggestion, then why does the form remain so consistent even among those who claim they had never studied the legend beforehand? If it is military hardware, why do reports predate the Cold War? If it is a giant eel population, why do so many sightings involve vertical movement, something atypical for eel behavior at the surface? If it is floating debris, why does it move against wind direction? And if it is simply waves, why do trained observers sometimes insist the water was completely still before the appearance? Patterns are powerful. In science, a repeating signal demands attention. In psychology, repeated imagery suggests archetype. In folklore, repetition creates myth. Loch Ness sits at the intersection of all three. The human mind is capable of filling in blanks, but it usually does so with variation. Details change, memories distort. Yet, across nearly 100 years of reports, the core image remains disturbingly stable. A creature that surfaces briefly, maintains composure, observes, and submerges without chaos. There is another element that repeats: silence. Many witnesses describe a strange stillness before the sighting. Birds quiet, the wind drops, the water flattens, then the movement. Skeptics argue this is retrospective narrative shaping, the mind adding drama after the fact. That is possible, but the recurrence of the detail remains. The pattern extends beyond visuals. Sonar contacts, when unexplained, often describe large mid-water targets, not bottom-dwelling forms. Vertical movement, transient presence. Even when technology improves, the anomalies, rare, fleeting, echo the same behavior witnesses describe: appear, move, disappear. No carcass, no skeletal remains, no confirmed biological sample, just repetition. Every explanation offered over the decades resolves part of the puzzle. The hoaxes explain the photos. Optical distortion explains some sightings. Acoustic layering explains certain sonar returns. Eels explain unusual DNA concentrations. Military secrecy explains missing datasets. But no single theory explains everything. And that is where the discomfort grows, because mysteries usually collapse under accumulation of data. Loch Ness has accumulated data for nearly a century, and the central silhouette remains intact. Perhaps it is coincidence. Perhaps it is the power of suggestion reinforcing itself across generations. Or perhaps something else is happening. Something subtle enough to evade certainty, but persistent enough to resist dismissal. The longer the pattern continues, the more difficult it becomes to ignore. Every explanation solves one piece and breaks another. And somewhere between imagination and measurement, between folklore and sonar, between shadow and signal, the shape remains, unproven, uncaptured, unresolved. Not every sighting of Loch Ness happened from a distant hillside. Some were close, too close. Over the decades, a small number of witnesses have claimed encounters at distances of 20, sometimes 30 meters. Not silhouettes on the horizon. Not blurred shapes through binoculars. Presence. One fisherman in the late 1960s described drifting near the shoreline at dusk when the water beside his boat began to bulge upward. Not splash, not churn, but rise, as if something massive displaced it from below. He expected debris, a submerged log. Instead, a dark curve broke the surface. He later said the skin did not look scaled. It looked smooth, dense, almost rubber-like. Not reflective like fish, it absorbed light. He did not report it immediately. When asked years later why, he answered simply, "No one wants to be that man." Another account from the 1980s came from a couple walking along the southern bank at twilight. They claimed they saw what they first believed was an overturned canoe drifting silently. Then it moved against the wind. The shape extended, not rapidly, not dramatically, but with slow articulation. A section lifted vertically from the water. They described it as thicker than a swan's neck, darker than the surrounding water, and disturbingly stable. No thrashing, no panic, just awareness. One of them later said the most unsettling detail was the eye. Not large, not glowing, just visible, set slightly forward, watching. When they returned the next day with a camera, there was nothing. In the 1990s, a kayaker reported something passing beneath him in water that was unusually still. He described a shadow longer than his vessel, moving at depth before angling upward. The surface tension changed. A ridge formed beside him. He froze. What emerged, briefly, was described not as serpentine, but muscular, a rolling back with subtle contour, not rigid like wood. He insisted the movement was unlike any fish he had seen in Scottish waters. Then it sank. No sound, no spray. Witnesses who report proximity often share another similarity: hesitation. Several accounts were given anonymously. Some were shared only years later. A few were documented by researchers who agreed to withhold names. Why? Because, unlike distant sightings, close encounters feel personal, and personal stories invite ridicule. There is another repeated detail in these reports: texture. Descriptions vary slightly, but the language clusters around the same ideas. Dark, smooth, heavy-looking, organic, but not clearly identifiable. Not reptilian in the classic sense, not mammalian either. Something in between. And then there is the movement. Many witnesses emphasize what the creature did not do. It did not lash its tail violently. It did not create explosive waves. It did not behave like a startled animal. Instead, it moved with controlled submersion, as if descending intentionally, as if aware. Skeptics argue that memory is fragile, especially under stress, that distance can be misjudged, that floating debris can appear animate in shifting light, all true. But what lingers in these testimonies is not the size, it is the composure. Whatever they believed they saw did not behave like a mistake. It behaved like something that knew it did not need to hurry. Close encounters do not provide proof. They do not offer measurements or DNA. They offer something more difficult to categorize: fear mixed with certainty. Not certainty of species, but certainty of presence. And perhaps that is why these accounts endure. Not because they are dramatic, but because they are restrained. No screaming headlines, no theatrical claims, just quiet voices, years later, saying it was there, 20 meters away, watching, and then gone. In 2018, the mystery of Loch Ness entered a laboratory. For decades, the debate had circled around photographs, sonar returns, eyewitness testimony, and speculation. But now, science had a new tool, one that did not rely on sight: environmental DNA. Every living creature sheds genetic material into its surroundings: skin cells, mucus, waste. Microscopic traces invisible to the human eye, but detectable through sequencing technology. If something large and unknown lived in Loch Ness, it would leave behind biological evidence. You do not need to see a creature to prove it exists. You only need its DNA. A team of international researchers, led by geneticist Neil Gemmell from the University of Otago, collected water samples from multiple locations and depths across the loch: surface water, mid-depth columns, near the sediment floor. Hundreds of samples, each filtered, each analyzed, each sequenced. The process was methodical, clinical, transparent. If a large reptile lived in the loch, its DNA would appear in the data. If a massive unknown predator swam beneath the surface, it would leave genetic fingerprints. The results were published, and they were clear. No evidence of plesiosaur DNA. No trace of large reptilian species. No unknown massive vertebrate hiding in the database. The data showed fish, microorganisms, bird traces, mammalian residue likely from surrounding wildlife. And one more thing: eels, a significant amount of eel DNA. More than many researchers expected. The European eel is a known inhabitant of Loch Ness, typically slender, usually not enormous, but capable in rare cases of reaching considerable size. The eDNA findings suggested the loch contained a healthy eel population, perhaps even a larger than average one. To many scientists, this was the most plausible biological explanation yet. No prehistoric survivor, no undiscovered reptile, just fish. The conclusion felt decisive. For some, it was the end. Because environmental DNA is powerful. It does not depend on witness reliability. It does not blur like photographs. It does not echo ambiguously like sonar. It measures life directly. If something large lived there, it should have appeared. But the results introduced a quieter complication. Environmental DNA can confirm presence. It struggles with absence. Failure to detect a species does not mathematically prove non-existence, especially if the population is extremely small, if there were only one or two large animals, if they shed minimal trace material, if currents dispersed genetic fragments beyond sampling zones. Detection becomes statistically unlikely. Not impossible, unlikely. The researchers themselves were careful. They did not claim to have solved the legend. They stated what the data showed and what it did not. There was no evidence of a giant reptile. There was no evidence of an unknown large predator. But there was also no definitive explanation for the consistent pattern of sightings stretching back nearly a century. Science searched for a monster. It found biology, but biology did not explain the behavior. It did not explain the repeated descriptions of vertical forms rising from still water. It did not explain coordinated sonar anomalies decades apart. It did not explain why, even after the DNA results were published, reports continued. The eDNA study was meant to close the case. Instead, it narrowed it. Loch Ness was not hiding a Jurassic survivor, but something, whether misinterpretation, rare natural phenomenon, or something still misunderstood, continued to move through the story. And when science removes the impossible, what remains may not be comfortable, because sometimes the end of one mystery simply reveals a different one beneath it, and the water, as always, remains dark. For nearly a century, Loch Ness has carried more than water. It has carried expectation. We searched with binoculars. We searched with cameras. We searched with sonar sweeping like invisible light across the depths. We searched with genetics, extracting fragments of life from a single drop. Each time technology improved. Each time the mystery adapted. Photographs were exposed as hoaxes, yet sightings continued. Sonar revealed moving targets, yet nothing surfaced. DNA removed the prehistoric monster, yet the pattern remained. So what is left? Perhaps the wrong question has guided us all along. Not, is there a monster? But why does this story refuse to die? Loch Ness sits in a landscape built for imagination. Steep hills, low cloud, water darkened by peat until it becomes almost opaque. Light does not travel far beneath its surface. Shapes dissolve quickly. Distance compresses perspective. Stillness amplifies suggestion. In such an environment, uncertainty thrives. But this is not just about fog and reflection. The legend persists because it lives in the gap between data and experience. Science measures what it can detect. Humans remember what they feel. And sometimes, those two realities do not overlap. When a witness stands 20 meters from something unexplainable, the memory does not vanish because a laboratory finds eel DNA. When sonar registers a moving mass, the echo does not disappear because a photograph was staged decades earlier. The mystery survives not because it has been proven, but because it has never been completely erased. And maybe that is the deeper truth. We live in an age that maps distant planets, scans the ocean floor, tracks satellites in real time. We believe that darkness retreats when illuminated. Yet Loch Ness remains dark. Not because we lack instruments, but because darkness is not always physical. It exists in perception, in expectation, in the human need for something beyond the measured world. If there is no creature in the depths, then the legend is a mirror, reflecting how easily patterns form, how powerfully suggestion spreads, how profoundly we fear what we cannot see beneath still water. If there is something there, rare, elusive, misidentified, then it has accomplished something remarkable. It has remained just out of reach. For 90 years, technology improved, the mystery remained. And perhaps that is the final revelation. Loch Ness does not demand belief. It demands humility, because whether the monster is biological, psychological, or symbolic, the water keeps its secrets the same way it always has. Silently, unmoved, waiting.